So I'm guessing you're watching this video now because you just bought yourself a brand new DJI drone. So in the video, I'm going to show you what changes we need to do to get the most from this little drone. And that's going to be changes with the app, the camera, and some controller specific settings. I'm also going to show you the biggest mistake people make when switching from the app to the controller. And at the end of the video, I'll also show you what to do in the event that you lose your drone, which happened to me last week, and how you can recover it quickly. So with nothing else to do, let's crack on. So we need to go into settings, and from there you can see all the automated options we got. Now the one we're going to look at first of all is going to be follow. Now if we select follow, you can see that we've got three different options, and these are close, medium and far. Now you need to set these depending on the environment that you're in and the type of filming style that you want to do. So if you're going to go for things like close, that's going to give you a more intimate setting, whereas medium is going to be more for a balanced shot, and far if you're in an open area and there's no concern about space. Now I would recommend using far the majority of the time because it gives you better composition for your images. Also, it gives you better tracking if you're moving at a quicker speed like jogging or on a bike. And I'd also recommend it because it'll help limit the exposure changes when you're using the drone. And if you try and shoot with the sun behind the drone, that'll also help. With settings like close or medium, if you stop suddenly, there is a tendency that the drone could actually bump into you, and that could spoil your footage as well. Now you're also able to use voice commands for the distance, like farther or closer, but that's for another video. So now we're going to move on to the height. Now that gives us three options of low, flat and high. And again, for this, I would recommend sticking to the high settings. Obviously you've got a drone because you want an aerial view, and if you use the other two settings you don't get that effect, so you need the drone up high looking down and you to make the most of it. Also, if the drone is high, it helps limit the exposure compensation because you haven't got the differences in the contrast between a dark area and a light area like the sky and where you're filming. So the higher the drone is, the better that your footage will be. Now you also need to take into consideration your environment. If you're in somewhere like say a forest and there's lots of trees, you've got the risk of the drone crashing into branches and damaging the drone. So you'd have to use a lower one like flat or low. But generally speaking, the further out and the higher the drone is, the better for your footage. So next we're going to look at custom. Now with custom, this is split into three separate sections, being boomerang, helix and direction track. So the one we're going to concentrate on is direction track, and with this the drone will sit in front of you, and as you move forward the drone will move with you, keeping that predefined distance. So as with follow, you've got the same options with the height and the distance, and again I would set this to be as far away as possible and as high as possible, and again this will help limit the exposure compensation and also keep you more in the frame when you're moving quicker. So that leads us on to the video resolution. Now with the video resolution of the Neo, you've only got two options of 4K in horizontal or 1080p in horizontal and vertical mode. So the Neo really is only suitable for more social media aspects. So you need the video resolution to be as high as possible. So I would recommend sticking at 4K at 30 frames a second. So if you want to film in slow motion, you could set it at 1080p at 60 frames a second, and that will slow your footage down by half. But I wouldn't really recommend using 1080p because the footage quality isn't really going to be that great. So from video then we can move on to photos. Now the Neo takes 12 megapixel photos, and it gives you the option of doing it in 4:3 format or 16:12. So you need to set the aspect ratio to 4:3. And this is because when a Neo takes a photo, it takes it in the 4:3 aspect, and even if you have it set to 16:9, it just takes that original image and crops it down to the 16:9 aspect ratio. So if you leave it in 4:3, you can adjust it yourself to 16:9, and that'll give you more verticality in which to play with and to frame your photo the way that you want. So really, you want to stick to the 4:3 format. And this is the bit where I say I'm not sponsored, so if you do find it useful, give me the thumbs up and the like, subscribe, because it does help out, as everybody says in every other video that you watch. So the Neo will record the audio using the microphones on your phone, and it'll also take out the background propeller noise. And this can be useful if you want to give a commentary on where you are or what you're doing. So if you press the icon at the bottom center, it'll take you to another screen which will show your microphone icon in the middle right. Now if you select this, the Neo will start recording using the microphone on your phone or any external mics you've got connected to record the audio around you. So if you don't need the audio on, I'd recommend switching this off, because the Neo will record the audio directly onto the drone in a separate file, and that will reduce the amount of available storage you got for your footage. Now this tip is quite important as it could ruin a full day's footage. If you're going from using the app to a controller like the RC2 or the RCN3, you need to confirm that you've got the same settings dialed in for both ways to control the drone. And this is because the Neo doesn't carry across the settings from one to another. So say for example, you're using the app to film in 4K 30, then you go over to the controller, that could be set to 1080p vertical, and then you're going to have the discrepancy between the two. So you really need to make sure that what is set on one is also set on the other. Next, we need to look at the return to home. Now, this is a function which is only available when you're using your controller and not on the app. And what this does, if the drone starts to run out of power or loses signal to the controller, it'll trigger an auto return to home where the drone will return to the home point from where it took off. So remember, the Neo doesn't have any obstacle avoidance sensors. So you need to set this return to home based on your environment. Now, if you're out again in the open, you're not going to have any issues. The drone will just take off, fly back to you without a problem. So if you're in an environment where you've got trees, you may want to set this to the minimum height of 10 meters. You don't want it going up to 30, 40 meters, hitting some branches and being stuck. So again, base it on where you are and what your conditions are at the time. Now, the Neo does tend to overexpose the footage and it doesn't have a high dynamic range. So this will mean that if you're filming, say, something with a lot of sky, the sky will be blown out. You won't get blue tones or the clouds. So we need to change that. Now, on the bottom of the screen, you will see the exposure compensation value. And if you press and change that to minus 0.3 or minus 0.7, that'll tell the Neo to underexpose the image slightly, and that'll bring back some of the details in the clouds or the sky. Also, shooting with the sun behind the drone will help even out the exposure of the scene. Now, the Neo can also be prone to some quite dramatic exposure changes, especially when moving from light to dark scenes. But we can mitigate this by simply pressing on the screen until a yellow box appears and then holding that until a padlock appears, and that will lock the exposure in place. But remember, when locking the exposure, you need to expose for the brightest part of the image. It's no good exposing for something dark and then as the drone moves around, go into a lighter area, because that will just mean it's going to be overexposed for that particular part. So this will mean now that as you fly the Neo around, the exposure is not going to change, it's going to stay fixed. But again, you can only do this using the controller and not via the app. Now, if you're using the RC2 or the RCN3, you have an option to customize some buttons. On the RC2, it's the FN button, and on the RCN3, it's the C1 and C2 buttons. So for all this, we go into Control, and then you can see the customized buttons, and then we can select whichever option we got. So for me, I tend to use the auto lock for the C1 or the first press of the button, and cruise control for the C2 or the two presses of the FN button. Now, the Neo does tend to over sharpen an image, but we can adjust this within the camera settings. So again, we go over to settings, go down to camera, and you come down and you'll see an option for style. Now, if you click on style, you'll see two further options, being sharpness and noise. And we want to reduce the sharpness down to -2 and the noise down to -1. So this will soften your image, make it less sharp and make it more pleasing to look at and more cinematic. Now, also, if you're using the controller, we can add grid lines. So grid lines will give you a visual representation on the screen of the controller. It's not carried onto your footage of how to compose your shots. Now, you can have the horizontal and vertical grid lines if you want to use your rule of thirds, or you can have the diagonal and the central point if you want to try and keep your subject centered within your frame. The last thing you want to do is go home after a day's filming only to find that where you thought you had your subject nicely centered, it's off to the left or the right. So grid lines can be an essential tool with help with framing and composition of your footage. And now my final bit of advice, which hopefully you'll never have to use, which could result in you losing or keeping your drone. I've been flying DJI drones since 2016. And one day last week, I had a flyaway where my Neo was filming a tower and then it flew off and I thought I'd lost it. Now, it took me and my friends 5 hours to locate and recover the drone, because even though I've been flying since 2016, I'd never lost a drone, and as a result, I didn't know about this feature. And that feature is Find My Drone. So if the worst does happen and you do get a flyaway with the drone, if you go down to your profile settings on the bottom of the screen, click on that, and from there then you'll see an option to Find My Drone. So that'll bring up a map, and on the map you can see yourself, which is the blue dot, and the drone's last location, which is the red arrow. And there's a line then between the two which shows you which direction you've got to go in to get to the drone. Now, once you're in the vicinity of the drone, there's also the option to start beeping and flashing. And that does exactly what it says. It'll cause the drone to start flashing the lights and making a beeper sound, so it's easier to locate. Hopefully you're never going to use it, but you never know. And if you do need it, now you know where to find it. All that remains for me to say is thanks again. If you found it useful, do the like and subscribe. If you've got any comments, leave them in the box below and I'll do my best to respond. And if there's anything you want to see done with the Neo, let me know and I'll see what I can do with that. So I'll catch you again soon. Thanks very much.